Hey guys, let's take a look at Angelina Jolie's cross-claim countersuit against Brad Pitt and some other parties, and why his lawsuit against her is dumb, and why her allegations of abuse are relevant to the lawsuit. Like, why is she bringing it up here? Is it just for negative publicity for him? We'll discuss how it ties into the lawsuit, and why her legal strategy and her allegations make her a much more credible individual to believe than, say, Amber Heard in the Johnny Depp case. So first, let's talk about the lawsuit against Angelina Jolie. And it is centered on the fact that Brad Pitt and Jolie owned a winery together. It was one that they bought through LLCs each of them owned before they got married. Worth a lot of money then and maybe a lot more money now. At any rate, they bought it together, and then, of course, they got married, and then they got divorced. So they are seeking to separate and go their individual ways, and this winery was in the middle of that. In fact, it was the biggest asset that Jolie had. I don't know about Pitt, but a lot of money at stake here, together well over $100 million. So there were negotiations that went on where there was a possibility that she would sell her stake over to Brad Pitt, and he would own all of it. And that didn't work out. We'll get into a little bit more of the details that are in the lawsuit in just a minute. And eventually she sold her shares to the Stoli Group, which is associated with vodka. And so it's already an alcohol-based situation. She sold it to them, and he objects to that. And he's filed a lawsuit that seeks to unwind that transaction to say she didn't have the authority to make that sale. So that should be pretty easy. He just attaches the buy-sell agreement that they had at the time that they bought it or executed later that shows that she needed his consent to sell the shares, or that he had first right of refusal. I mean, that's it, right? Well, he doesn't have that. There is no agreement like that. There is no written agreement that prohibits her from selling her shares of the company. Instead, he's basically saying there was an implied promise, not only that he would have the first right of refusal, which would be one thing, but that she would never, ever, ever sell her shares to anyone unless he consented to it first. So that's a huge implied promise, right, for something that's worth 50, 60, 70 million dollars. Not a good basis for a lawsuit, but to me it appears premised more on butthurt and their general fight that they have going on with each other than a strong legal principle. If he'd wanted that agreement, why didn't he get it? And that's something that we'll see in the documents when we look at it. So let's dig into it a little bit. So Pitt files this lawsuit against Jolie and says, hey, you didn't have the right to sell these shares because we had an agreement that you would never sell your shares ever unless I consented to it. And again, that's not in writing. Now, some facts come out early in Jolie's lawsuit that are extremely relevant to this. And one series of facts here, which I think are very important, is that before the winery was bought by them, her own business manager said, hey, you guys should have a buy-sell agreement in place that controls how you would move this asset away from each other or control or have influence to the other side's ability to do that. You should have a buy-sell agreement in place prior to your purchase of this winery that will control how you handle this in the future. Now, that's a business manager's advice, and it's good advice. I mean, what's one thing they should do is anticipate potential conflicts down the road and suggest solutions now that will prevent future heartbreak later. That's just really typical corporate law, business law, things like that. It was good advice. And she's not a corporate expert, but she reads it and she says back to the person, okay, discuss that with Brad's business manager. She gives the green light to go ahead and discuss, hey, let's have an agreement that would control how we would distribute this or sell it in the future in the event that we don't want to own it together. And that occurs. Eventually, Pitt's business manager responds back and says, look, I know we talked about this earlier, but Brad does not feel like we need an agreement like that between two reasonable people. So there you go. He declined to have this agreement in writing and says, well, we'll just be reasonable. Well, what's reasonable? Is reasonable saying that you can never, ever sell your share of the company without the consent of the other party? That's not how businesses are normally controlled. You can sell your shares to other people. A restriction is something that's put in writing. It would be very reasonable to say, well, if we can't come to an agreement which I don't owe you in the first place because we didn't reach that, for you to buy my shares, then I should be able to sell my part of the business and get my investment back. Why should I have my entire net worth put away forever at your consent, somebody who I'm in a contentious divorce with? Is that reasonable? No, that's not the assumption under the law. So that to me indicates right off the bat that he had the chance to have what he's claiming that he has now actually in writing and declined to do that. But it gets a little worse, I think, for at least how his case appears, in that while he tried to make it like she stole away in the dark and sold this to his worst enemy or whatever, that's not what happened, at least according to what she's saying in her suit and things that she's quoting. For instance, she had reached an agreement in principle to sell her portion of that business back to Brad Pitt, a price they had agreed on. So she actually gave him the first right to buy this entire property. And they apparently reached an agreement on a price, something around $54 million, something like that. And it didn't conclude. They were fighting about other things in their divorce or whatever. And so finally, Jolie says, because she's not getting any profits from it, nothing's being distributed, that he needs to either take the offer and conclude the deal, or else she's going to have to do something else. And she finally puts a timeline on it and says, look, if I don't have a positive answer on this, I'm going to seek some other way to handle this, sell it to somebody else. And they let the deadline go by on his side, and then they come back and say, well, okay, we'll do the deal, the $54 million or whatever the number is, and we need a non-disparagement clause. You can't say anything about Pitt's personal conduct during the course of the marriage. Okay, what's that got to do with this winery? And we're going to hold back $8.5 million of the purchase price also for 4 years and have this non-disparagement clause in there. So that wasn't exciting to Jolie or her team, that this new condition was placed into the deal by Brad Pitt's side, and she declined to do that. And he declined to just buy it for a certain amount of money. So she alerted him through her representatives that she may seek a third party to sell this to, and that she was going to do that. She did do it. So this was occurring in the summer, and then a few months later, she did sell this her shares to Stoli, and then after that, Brad Pitt files this lawsuit and says that you couldn't do that. So she got over $60 million from Stoli, I think it was. So yeah, she received $67 million from Stoli versus the $54.4 million that Pitt and her had previously discussed that he could buy it for. So she had undervalued the thing by a good $12.5 million there based on what she could find from another party. Should he have taken that offer if he could have afforded it? Yeah, probably. I don't think he should have hung that up on the non-disparagement clause. So she gets a lot more money by going to this third party after having offered to sell it to him for substantially less money. Does that seem like a bad actor? It doesn't to me. So she gave him first right of refusal, essentially, to work this out and pay a price that they both agreed on. That didn't work out. He declined and added additional terms, according to her version of the lawsuit. And then she was able to sell her stake later to someone else who didn't demand these extra things for a lot more money. Why shouldn't she be able to do that? Now, if you're in the He-Man Woman Haters Club, then you're going to imagine, well, because he says she promised to never, ever sell her part of the company. Yeah, he had the chance to have that in writing. You really think a reasonable person is going to say, well, for the entire rest of my life, I can never get out of this business with you, even if we get a divorce and have a highly contentious situation, except at your consent to do that you have to give me permission to sell what belongs to me. That's ridiculous. Now, if she had done that under the cover of darkness, sold it to his worst enemy or whatever, I could see him being mad about that, whether it be the basis for a lawsuit or not. It's something different. But that isn't what happened here. They actually tried to work out a deal, and she tried to sell it to him first. So to me, she's clearly in the moral right of this part of the lawsuit, which I think bodes well for the rest of what we're going to talk about. So let's move into now about, well, what about these allegations of abuse that are in her counterclaim and her cross suit? Is this relevant, or is she just trying to create bad publicity? Now, of course, making the other side look bad is something your lawyer naturally wants to do for you. So I'm not going to say that part of the reason to have these allegations in the complaint isn't to make him look bad, because that's a valid tactic for both sides. They tried to make her look bad, like she was reneging on her obligations to him. So she's putting context to that. This whole document is 17 pages in total, including service and stuff. And the allegations about the abuse situation or the conflict on the airplane is about 1 page out of that. So it's not like her whole thing is about abuse and she's suing for abuse or assault or something like that. It's nothing like that. So it's just a 1 page out of it. And it's talking about the part of the narrative is, well, why did they get separated? And she tells about the conflict that occurred on the aircraft where Pitt, who apparently was drunk by his own concession, and there was an argument, which again, he doesn't disagree with, that she says escalated to physical contact between her and him. And I think he does dispute that. And also Pitt and one or more of the children, which he does dispute that. But that's what her allegations are. And that's in the complaint for a couple of reasons. One, to show why the business relationship broke down between them in terms of the winery. And also it puts context to what it is he was trying to keep her from talking about, right? His personal conduct during the marriage, that he wanted a non-disparagement clause in the sale of a winery, okay? Not in the divorce settlement, but in this sale of the winery, he wants this non-disparagement clause. So what does that got to do with the winery? So that, I think, shows the context of that. This is what he doesn't want talked about, probably. And also it shows why they split up. So that's how it has a relevance to the situation. Now, he can disagree with part of it. He doesn't disagree with all of it. But there it is. That's why it's relevant. So the totality of this thing, why is she substantially different, say, than an Amber Heard? I mean, if you're going to write off Amber Heard and say, well, she lied and she was trying to take advantage of the situation, this is just another case of that. You're not really looking at the different circumstances involved here. So remember, Amber Heard was trying to ride allegations into higher movie contracts and to higher levels of publicity. And when Depp sued her, she countersued for a ludicrous amount of money, just millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars that she claims she lost in her movie career because of his defamation of her. And it was basically a laughable strategy there. But because she went out so far on this limb, you know, she had to make this presentation in court as if she were just the complete victim in every situation. But yet there were audio tapes, videotapes of her taunting Depp, her having admitted to having hit Depp, her making fun of him for not liking that and saying that she really wasn't punching him that hard. A lot of credibility issues on some of the pictures and things like that. She just didn't present a good case. She went way overboard in what she was trying to say. And in fact, she was trying to get, and did get, she had already gotten a lot of money from Depp, and she wanted a lot more of his money. So how does Jolie compare to that? First of all, she's not trying to get money from Pitt. She's trying to get out of half of the business that she paid for originally, right? And she offered to sell it to him at a price substantially less than she could get from a third party. So by no means is that extorting Brad Pitt for his money. She's just trying to get liquid on an asset. And in the context of this lawsuit, he sues her, so he initiates the thing. What does she do? Does she sue him back and say, well, I want billions of dollars because you said something bad about me or you hit me or something like that? Her lawsuit only has one claim for relief in it, and that is declaratory. She asked the court to declare that she did have the right and authority to sell her half of the business, that it's undisputed that she owned, that there was no mystery, secret, lifelong, eternal obligation, that she couldn't sell it without his express permission, even though that was never asked for in a written document. That's all she's asking for. She is not asking for money judgment against him for his actions. Way different than the Depp Heard case, right? Way different. She is only asking to be able to sell an asset. So she's not trying to make money off of these allegations. And that is different. Not that somebody can't sue for a money judgment if they're abused or defamed. Of course you can, but what I'm saying is when they do that, you're obviously going to look into the motive for that and say, well, they're trying to get money off of that. Does that play into whether they're telling the truth or not? And here, she's not trying to do that. She's just trying to get it clear from the court that the sale that she conducted of her portion of the business only was lawful and she had the right to do it. So there are two material things I think that are major differences here. And the first one is the allegation of abuse, which is, in this case, this single incident that occurred on the aircraft. Pitt admits he was drunk, admits he argued. There's no allegation that Jolie was drunk or in any other way incapacitated, or that any of the kids were. And certainly the older child who allegedly was in the conflict, no fan of Pitt's at this point, which is, that's sad. So if your assumption is, well, she's just lying. He wasn't ever charged with a crime, so she's just a liar. Really? So you're just gonna automatically take the view of somebody who admits they were drunk against somebody who wasn't. And keep in mind, her actions at the time were consistent with her perception of what occurred on that aircraft, because after they got off of it, 5 days later, she filed for a divorce. So it's it's not like that she created this scenario up later to try and justify her request for money or something like this. This was definitely contemporary at the time, consistent with her actions. And I don't understand why people don't take into account, unless they've never been around it, the fact that somebody who can be a pretty nice person normally, when they're drunk or on drugs or on both, could exhibit different behavior. I mean, have you never been around drunk people? Some people get dumber. Some people just lay around on the couch. But some people become more violent or erratic or argumentative or angry than they are when they're sober. The other thing is their recollection and recounting of events when they're in that state, not necessarily as reliable as people who weren't in that state when they were around, right? Yes, let's always trust the slammed out drunk person, their account of events over people who were sober at the time. So I don't think being on Jolie's side on this requires that you hate Brad Pitt. I certainly don't. I like the guy. I think he's cool. I mean, I don't know him, but his public persona out there works on me because I think he's kind of cool. I think he's a good actor, and I enjoy the things that he's in. That doesn't have anything to do with whether he got drunk, and by his own admission, he was a raging alcoholic, or at least a substantial alcoholic, the raging part. Although he did agree he was yelling and screaming. So yeah, he was a raging alcoholic at the time, that he might have gone overboard on the aircraft in a confined space like that and bumped people and things like that. It's not like she was saying that he pulled a sword out and tried to kill her with it. It just was an argument that went too far. She wasn't comfortable with it, and so she went for a divorce after that. She thought he crossed the line. By his own admission, he went into some kind of alcohol detox after that he needed to beat his problem with alcohol. And I hope he has done that. So I don't think believing her, taking her side in this requires you to think that he's evil. He had a problem that hopefully he's dealing with in a meaningful way, if you believe what she says. Like everything, it's also possible that there's some truth to both sides of it. She's a lot smaller than him and less strong, and she may have perceived him as more dangerous than he was trying to come across, or would have come across if you'd been there just watching it. You're not in her mind on how this thing worked. So to me, she hasn't gone out of her way to make allegations to make money, or made things up later that probably didn't happen before to support her current arguments. She doesn't have any of those flaws in her account. I think it's an unfortunate situation that unraveled in their relationship, and that hopefully he's a better person coming out on the other side of it, and they'll get all this put behind her. And then the second thing is, whether you agree with her accounting of what happened on the aircraft or not, is his argument reasonable that she can never sell her portion of the winery without his express permission? I mean, why would you support a thing like that? That goes against the whole concept of private property ownership. If you want to restrict someone's ability to sell something they own, you really ought to have that in writing, especially if it's going to be not just your first right to purchase it, but they can't ever sell it at all without your personal permission. So to me, that's ridiculous for him to make that argument. It doesn't look good on him at all. It's more like a controlling revenge kind of a situation than it is anything reasonable. And if he didn't want someone else to own it, he should have maybe not treated it so much as leverage during the attempted buy-sell that they were engaged in for the $54 million, but rather as something he needed to get done because it mattered to him a whole lot. Instead of trying to put in the non-disparagement clause and other things, get that winery bought. You can fight over the other stuff later. Maybe you can offer her some money for a non-disparagement clause. But if you didn't want it sold to someone else, then instead of trying to hold it as leverage against her, you should have consummated the transaction when you had the chance to do it. So whether she's totally right or wrong on the airplane thing, I definitely take her side on this thing on the winery, that it's her part of the winery, and she didn't even owe him the first right of sale to begin with, but she tried to make that happen, and she should be able to sell it to whoever she wants after that point. That's my opinion on it. I don't know that it's hurt the winery any. As she said, it was a company that has a lot of capital, a lot of experience, and she recognizes that this winery is going to be a major asset in her children's inheritance, and so she wouldn't want to do anything that would harm the value of that winery. That's why she wanted him to buy it to begin with. It's not like she was out to destroy the winery. That's the major asset her kids would have out of the combined assets of the parents in an inheritance situation. So those arguments, to me, they all make sense. I think she's right on this, unless there's some weird legal aspect that isn't the normal sort of American law. I haven't delved that deeply into it. I'm just reacting to it based on the allegations that I've read and the status of the contract, that secret provisions that are implied or oral on something of this magnitude. No, I don't think so. So I hope this does get worked out. I don't know how it can really, other than she wins. Okay, she sold the thing. She should win this lawsuit, and then hopefully they will someday get all of this conflict behind them and move on with their lives and quit paying lawyers and accountants to fight proxy wars on their behalf and PR agents to say bad things about each other in the press and live a life that's a little less conflict intensive between the two of them. So anyway, it's a different situation, as all these cases are, than the Depp Heard and some of the other cases that we're looking at, like the Manson Wood situation. This one's different. And to me, as much as I thought Heard overblew her case and overstated her case and deserved the verdict that she got from the jury, I think Jolie is in the other camp here. Thanks, bye.